Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again, another podcast show. And I've genuinely got one of the, I'm just trying how to describe him now, but one of my favorite young men in the business. Okay. And the person I'm talking about is Brendan Sullivan from IATA. So Brendan, absolutely great to have you on board, son.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chris.
There you go.
Looking forward to it.
I've even called you a son because I feel as though I've given you fatherly advice over the years from when we first met. But joking aside, Brendan, I want to start the show by saying the decision to make you head of cargo, okay, is logical. It makes sense. I think it's one of the most popular decisions that IATA have made. And we all wish you the utmost of success, my friend. And anybody that's worked with you over the years and your shadow or your I'd say your brother from another mother, Andre, you two have been absolutely superb. Really, really good.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I really appreciate the support. Actually, I've had quite a lot of nice messages from people in the industry, and of course, now comes the as someone politely mentioned on LinkedIn the other day. Now comes the hard part, right?
Yeah.
And time to start delivering on a few of these key things that we've discussed over the years. Perhaps discussed to the point of now is really the time for action in some cases.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that shortly because I do think, and we'll cover it a little bit, and some of the characters that have been on the ICHC and also prior to that and other committees that you've been responsible for, some are a lot more honest than others. Okay, and you also know some make a lot more sense than others. So some of those points now, I think you've got an ideal opportunity because not only is it a fresh start with yourself, but now it's a fresh start for the industry, but we're facing some real challenges, okay, especially in cargo, mainly because of capacity, etc. So we'll come to that later. But what I want to start with is the early years of Brendan Sullivan. So when it all started, all right, and I remember the first time I was introduced to you and I thought, blimey, there's a fine looking lad. He's got the height, he's got the model looks, few fashion faux pas. So I'm glad to see that you've calmed those down. But when you first started out, how long did you think you were going to be in this particular field? How long did you think you were going to stay with IATA?
With IATA, I really wasn't sure. I joined IATA in 2007, and it was after having been in an airline for a number of years, and it really gave me an interesting picture, right? It completely changes the view that you have of the industry. So when I was with Air Canada, frontline. Operational support positions, and really kind of very close to the operation, hands-on. I could touch boxes. It was very interesting work every day. Coming to IATA, you get a different picture. You see many different airlines, many different ground handlers and forwarders. They're different challenges. They're all a little bit unique, and we work together to try and come up with something. I didn't know how long that was actually going to last and still continue to be interesting. I think probably the thing that's most interesting about air cargo is that it never stays static. There is absolutely nothing sort of, well, you'll do that and you'll do it for the next 30 years exactly as is. Almost every day there was a new change. Even when I held a position for quite some time, every year was a new project, a new initiative, something that we thought would add value to the industry. And we would go down that path. So ultimately, you start to realize that actually it's very challenging. It's extremely dynamic. It's a little bit of a different timeline from working frontline operations, but that's got its own challenges when we look a little bit further out as to how long it may take an industry to make some changes.
Yeah.
That's got its own unique perspective, which is quite fun to work in. So within a couple of years, I started to realize it's not static. It's not boring. It's not the same thing day in and day out. It's very dynamic. And that meant, no, I'm quite convinced that this is a place I want to continue to work and deliver value for the industry. And that happened, I would say, quite rapidly once I started at IATA.
Okay, good. And now, obviously, we spent a lot of time together with ICHC and prior to that. What would you say was the turning point with that particular group and prior? In its original format that started to make a difference within the business, or do you think it made enough of a difference?
Well, it made a difference. That's 100% for sure. So for me, one of the turning points was we had started with that COAG group to bring airlines and ground handlers together, specifically in the cargo space, in a way that wasn't happening at the moment. There was no other group really doing that. And we wanted to create some procedures, right? We looked at the IGOM, the Ground Operations Manual. We worked on a whole chapter there. For me, the turning point was when we actually took focus and have created the Cargo Handling Manual. And at that time, we were also shifting the group around, so it's a consultative council. We made it a little bit higher level, if that makes sense. So a little bit more ownership of a complete spectrum of standards. Joint and equal representation between airlines and ground handlers. It was a really good dynamic and a good shift to work on something that we thought had value. Everyone in the room thought this is going to be valuable, and we were going to go ahead. And then, you know, if I look at what we did, we developed a cargo handling manual from scratch, from what used to be a small section, a chapter inside another manual. We compared, I don't know how many, I think it was 20 or so different cargo operations manuals from different parties to find out where do we need to make alignments, where do we need to change standards. And the growth rate on that, like in terms of implementation, was, I think we're at 400% year on year implementation of the cargo handling manual since its inception 5 years ago now, which is just incredible, right? So that to me is showcasing that people wanted that it filled a gap, right, in terms of what was happening in the industry. And you know, we have to do more. There is certainly more work to do just inside that space of handling standards, but it really made an impact. And that was a real turning point for me, working on that with all those different parties. And then being able to have some of my colleagues come in and put their experience and their views as well with different groups, not just ICHC, so bringing together some of the other groups, airmail, e-commerce issues, some of the quality side, all of that coming together into one manual. That was a real, like I said, turning point. And I believe also for the industry people who were on the group, right, we started to see a shift in who was there, and a shift in the dialogue and the rhetoric that was being used at the meeting.
No, it was I got to say, it was an absolute pleasure to have been part of it. And when we used to have those working groups and those sessions going around the manual, I think the one thing that stood out with the ICHM was the fact that it was a representative storyline from the very beginning of the process to the end of the process. And it also didn't keep, regurgitating or plagiarizing old manuals or existing manuals and trying to make it an all-in-one. If there was something that was valid and we could refer to it, it was referred to. If there was the messaging like Cargo IQ, we referred to it. You don't have to keep putting everything into a manual. And I think that's one of the lessons that everybody learned. Now, at the end of the manual, and we had all the appendices and we had all the things that we thought were useful additional tools, like the SLA. My God, Brendan, that was a minefield, wasn't it? With the amount of detail that some carriers expect from a handling agent. There's no way a handling agent staff could keep up with all of that. You've got to put your hand on your head for one, your finger in your ear for another, hold your nose for another, and maybe put your finger in somewhere else that where the sun doesn't shine, because some people are just so anal about what they want, and neither party could measure it.
Yeah, that was one of the more interesting discussions, actually, because everyone understood. Everyone came to the table with the same understanding. A service level agreement is an agreement on service levels we're supposed to measure, right?
Yep.
People had varying degrees of how frequent they wish to measure it and in what fashions, but everyone agreed this is an agreement on service levels that we wish to measure. You don't measure 40 pages worth of text. It's not possible to measure an agreement that is, that kind of thing. And so working through what's in there, why is it in there? Is it historical? Does it belong in another agreement of some kind? Should we be making changes like that to the standard ground handling agreement, perhaps? What is it that's missing, that's forced you to go down this path? And that's one of the really interesting things about working in all these working groups, is that you realize that there wasn't ever one reason why an SLA blew up to 40 pages. It's many reasons added over time.
Yeah.
And to strip that back, that does take a while. And that's one of the areas where I don't think we have enough traction on how many people have implemented the recommended SLA.
Yeah.
But certainly what we have seen is that people have stripped out some of that extra stuff. So maybe they haven't gone down completely, but they've aligned in those areas, and then they have to kind of look at, okay, well, maybe that's not service level. Maybe that's something else altogether, and that should be in another agreement. Some of that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Okay, well, and that's good, because that the more simpler and the more relevant we make something, then we can align it to like a day in the life of a piece of cargo, so people understand the whole process and flow, why it's important that they do their part correct for the next part. Now, with that dynamic and some of the changes and the way we know it can work, now you look at where we are. So obviously COVID, what an incredibly terrible disruptor for everybody across the whole planet. Awful. However, it also gives an opportunity to do things differently, to get rid of those legacy additional stones in everybody's rucksack, and really have a wipe the slate clean. So we're doing a digital event in September, and bring back better and make it matter. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get real focus on what are the most critical things that are necessary to deal with in the business that keeps the business sustainable. And all the other, it's to a degree, yes, it's useful if you've got the time. Yes, it's useful if you want to know what's recommended. Yes, it's useful if you want to think about the important things. But the critical areas are what matter now. Okay, so just not put you under any pressure, but the critical areas that IATA are focusing on, especially from your now new position, Brendan, what are they going to be? Or have you thought about a few? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to pin you down to a list straight away with deadlines. That's not the issue. But what areas do you think are really necessary now from a criticality perspective to address?
We've actually been thinking about this for quite some time. We work with our cargo advisory council, so those are the heads of cargo from the airlines. We've recently had some board discussions as well at the CEO level, because really they've got supreme focus right now on cargo that possibly hasn't happened in many years. So we've done a lot of work in this area. Our top three priorities: safety and security. It's number one. It remains number one. In particular, though, the lithium battery issue. We have a number of challenges there. Governments really need to begin to address the threat of undeclared dangerous goods in cargo and mail in a very consistent way. We have had incidents. Thankfully, they haven't been as bad as potential for those issues. And what we don't see is governments stepping in and really penalizing, criminalizing in some cases. And that to us is critical. So it's an area we're going to spend some time and focus on. And in addition to that, looking at things like fire containment, right? Where there are some industry tools, but we don't have the regulatory testing standards. So it's a good area for IATA to play an extra role in, as well as looking at how we can better guide the industry in terms of risk mitigation. So do you understand what it is that you're going to bring into your systems? And do you understand what your controls are capable of doing? So if you're putting containment in, do you understand what was tested? And therefore what is containable? But the undeclared side is really a government oversight issue, and one we need to tackle as IATA, so as a voice for the industry, but also jointly with the industry. We need to have other industry parties also join us in this discussion, in this call to action of governments. So that's number one. Number two is digitalization. We keep saying it, but it's digitalization now with speed, because we had a situation where a lot of paper was removed because we didn't want to touch it. We didn't want to be in close proximity to individuals. Great. If that's the reason that we're going to use today, that's fine. Let's keep it going, right? Let's not come backwards at all for any reasons. Digitalization really underpins so many of our other initiatives. So if you look at our cross-border, the need to have fast and efficient and secure borders, digitalization is one of the keys to that, right? And so we have the One Record program. We need to continue the rollout and implementation of One Record, but also we need to make sure that the industry is embracing some of these new use cases that are coming to them as a result of the pandemic. So shifts in supply chain dynamics, your e-commerce use cases where really the business model has changed quite drastically for some parties. We can't go to paper-based processes for those types of things. And we can't try and build in legacy processes for what is essentially highly digital traffic. And the third, which is it's sustainability. It really needs to be at the core of everything that we do. IATA is really committed to addressing the sustainability challenges. We have a number of sustainability targets at the overall aviation level, which we'll continue to move towards and hit them. But we also need to look at what else we can do in the cargo space. There are a number of areas in cargo that can have extra focus. And I'll use an example without saying what necessarily we're able to do on this, but for example, single-use plastics in the cargo area has been a challenge for a number of years. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution globally, but we need to work together to do so. Sustainability is one of those areas where it's not an IATA-driven initiative alone. This is something where we need partners and we need to do it together. And so we're going to strengthen up some of those partnerships and tackle the sustainability challenge. I do mean this not just from an environmental perspective, even though that was the first example I used. I mean sustainability in its broadest definition. This industry needs to be sustainable in order to continue and continue its growth path.
Yeah, so it's from a business perspective as well, just not the planet, and that's important you say that, Brendan, because obviously there's so many things now outside of our industry, just globally, where people are ashamed of the past. There's too much focus on the past. Just my opinion, and it's only my opinion, but everybody should get a chance to do whatever they feel they're able to do, no matter what their background, religion, color, age, whatever. It's people on a planet. But the most important thing is to be positive and focus on today, what you can change for tomorrow, not what's brought us to today. So the sustainability issue is also something that everybody jumps on. But at the end of the day, Brendan, it's a balance of planet, people, and profit. And you look at sustainability from an airport perspective, and putting everything electric. I mean, most airports don't have the surge, they don't have the power to do such a thing. So again, to invest that sort of money at this particular time, you have to be realistic about it. So I think that there needs to be a reality about the sustainability word when we say it, whereas the pending issues at the moment are the actual sustainability of our business. And when you're talking about, the primary ones being safety and security, again, I'm going to go out on a little limb because I'm old enough to do it now. But yes, safety and security, of course it is. That's paramount in our business. Once that is on the board behind and it's on the tabletops in front and it's on the screens, the real issue is cash. The real issue is survival. So when you say about CEOs wanting to get involved in certain things, with the greatest of respect, the majority of CEOs are pushed and pressured by commercial decisions and what if, and it has to see that turnover. So you've now got CEO focus on cargo. So this is a journey, step down the C steps now. You've got CEO, cargo, cash, capacity. Okay, so the CEO is focused on cargo because it's the only area that's bringing cash in for the airline. Now we've got the problem with capacity. So if that capacity continues to be at a shortage, okay, it's great short term for the rates, it's great short term for the business. But as we all know, when certain things are affected by such high cost, people start to look elsewhere. So whereas the just-in-time principle then became just in case, now it's going to be, what do we do for the future? So, you might get more online localized distribution centers. It will revert back to sea freight, road, train, etc. So we've got to be very careful with the balance that we're in. So I think cargo now needs to be a complete focus of itself, not as a byproduct of the passenger capacity that's there. And that's something that really needs to be taken seriously. That's just my opinion.
It's a completely valid opinion. I think it's shared by many parties in the industry. the air cargo revenues in 2021 are going to hit about 30% of airline revenue.
Yeah.
We'll obviously see that pull back a bit, but you can see the level of focus that CEOs are putting on cargo, and you can see that it's not a short-term decision for them. A number of them have invested in freighters, converting some of their passenger aircraft or acquiring new freighters, and freighters are not something you do for 2 or 3 years, right?
Exactly.
And if you do, you definitely engage in a leasing operation. Freighters are a longer term decision that you make, and it's one that you say, we're committed to the cargo business, we're committed to making this work, and you can see that CEOs of traditional belly space carrier, cargo carrier airlines, they're making this because they want to offer the capacity, right, which is great, but they also want to make a commitment to the cargo customers that they will continue to be a reliable and resilient option for them as their supply chains shift and become, what they evolve to in the future. So, I mean, I agree. CEOs need to continue the focus. We'd love to make sure that remains, and that means that the air cargo industry needs to deliver on what it has in front of them, right? The challenge of reduced capacity right now, very dynamic capacity as well, right? Where we were able to turn on these so-called freighters, the passenger aircraft for cargo operations, in a matter of weeks.
Yep.
And then it was amazing. It was one of the greatest stories throughout this pandemic for me that we keep going back to. But then you have to advise your ground handlers, create brand new in a matter of weeks, which is very dynamic, and this changes quite rapidly. And that, I think, is going to continue for some time before it begins to level out. And that means air cargo has some challenges to continue to deliver in this period.
Yeah. Now, obviously, Brendan, and the reason some of the larger aircraft started to disappear from the horizon, and freighters, that argument's been going up and down for ages. But do you see one of the solutions perhaps being that you'll have alliance freighters, or you'll have a freighter that's a common freighter that can be used by several carriers, so it keeps it in the air, with as many operating hours as possible? Do you think people are going to be able to open their minds to collaborate in a different way?
Well, I think people are open to collaborating in a different way. Exactly how that then manifests itself, I'm not entirely sure. I'd love to have a crystal ball and say, yeah, we're going to go to shared use something, and therefore we would then be in a position to help support that with whatever is needed. Kind of go back to the classic kind of framework agreements, multilateral data agreements, and so on. I actually couldn't predict that. What I can say is that people seem to be very open to collaborating in different ways than they have before. As an air cargo industry, in order to deliver, right? Air cargo has been a vital partner throughout this pandemic. Started with PPE, moved into vaccines and medical equipment and supplies, e-commerce goods throughout. It's been a vital partner for the supply chain, but also for the global community as a whole. And throughout that, I mean, we have air cargo heroes kind of throughout the industry. It's been amazing to watch how they do that, and they're doing it in ways that wasn't in place in terms of partnerships, in terms of agreements and handling arrangements and so on. It wasn't in place before the pandemic. This is new, it's dynamic, it's ready to change, and I think it's a rapidly evolving space.
Yep, no, and long may it continue. Now, you also mentioned there about, I'm going to come back to safety and security in a minute, but you mentioned about digitization, and data-driven decision-making has become something that all politicians are talking about now. So instead of making a voter's confidence statement and promising something, they've realized that you have to turn to the experts and go on data-driven decision-making. Now, talking about sharing, and it is so important, because at the end of the day, the more information that's available to call upon, and the better the AI or algorithm, feedback or access, that's logic. But still, people, it's a little bit like playing cards. Even you see when you're playing cards with your family and your grandmother walks past, you sort of shield the cards because you think, well, my God, what's she going to do? But people just do it naturally. So people are still protecting their front and back doors and their windows. So they're saying, yes, we need to do all this. But when it comes down to actually offering or actually supporting it, it's also slower than it should be, I feel.
I mean, there's still individual company interests to keep in mind, and that actually kind of ties in a little bit to sustainability. There's elements that make a lot of sense to share, and there's elements which we're more hesitant about.
Yeah.
One of IATA's roles will be to help kind of bring some parties together. Obviously, not in certain areas, commercially sensitive and anti-competitive. We wouldn't be involved in any of that. There isn't any of that discussion. So it's more, okay, what can we collaborate on? And therefore, how can data support us? What data do we have, and what can be supported? In many cases, using, sort of third party, especially trusted third party for data sharing is a really good thing. We've have an extremely long history of doing this on cargo data, on safety data, and I think it's something that needs to continue to evolve to match the times, which is we need more data. Well, we need more data and analysis, rather. We need the analysis in many cases. We need the data science to come in and help us understand how we can make a few predictions and move in the right direction. Move towards predictive where possible, especially when it comes to safety. There's this body of knowledge existing in the data that we need to kind of get out there so that we can get ahead of an issue rather than have these kind of lead indicators that are too far out there for us to be able to actually make steps in the direction of stopping them.
But that's an area that, I mean, you touch in there on safety and security, and by nature of the two words themselves, it's quite sensitive. But that's an area where people don't share enough data, so other people can see where they are, what the best trends are, what the areas of concern are, and then start focused together collectively as an industry. Because if something goes wrong in that industry, we're all going to be affected. Yeah,
absolutely. We've got good traction in certain data sharing programs where they like, we started the dangerous goods occurrence alert report system with a handful of airlines who had signed up to that, and it's over 40 now. So it's moved in the right direction. It's only been out for a year and a half, maybe about a year and a half now. And I don't think everybody even knows about it, if that makes sense, and knows that they could contribute and therefore get data about what is happening in that space in the industry. So job a little bit onto us to make sure that people are aware of what they can contribute to, and therefore where they can get a wider picture, a bigger, more complete picture of the industry. And it is, in my opinion, critical in so many different areas that we collectively pull some of this data together, and that we're able to share it with and it's de-identified and does all the right things that we need to do, but that we're able to share it so that people can make decisions, and that's all of them, sensitive decisions around safety and security, but also be able to take a look and say, okay, well, what's the trend in the industry in terms of e-commerce? Is it growing? And therefore, where should I put my efforts in terms of capturing that business?
Yeah, no, 100%. And like an old chestnut that keeps being burnt, but nobody wants to eat it. And you mentioned earlier about some of the documentation that's been withdrawn. And from so many of the sessions, and from so many of the individuals, there's one that comes to mind that I've got straight away, and he's been saying it ever since I met him, I think, which is about removing documentation and e-airware bill and everything. Brendan, why don't you? I mean, you've got 281 members, somewhere around that. Okay, you've got what? Why on earth can somebody not give a presentation with enough impact, supported by the current COVID sanitization and just being responsible, and say, now is the time? If not now, when? If not you, who, Brendan? So why can that decision not be made and say from such and such a date, this is going to stop? And I remember not that far away. I was always like rushing around airports or whatever, and I thought, oh blimey, I've left it a little bit. Oh, it's okay. And I'd try and sweet talk whoever it was on check-in to say, look, I can run, I can be there. Just let me get to the gate. If I don't get there, it's well. You can't do that now, because they'll look back lovely and they smile at you and they say, sir, you might be Linford Christie, or you might hold the 100 meters title or whatever, but with the greatest respect, as soon as you scan your boarding pass, it ain't going to let you in. So I'm sorry, but it's late. That's it.
Yeah.
Now, why on earth do we not have a date in mind and say to everybody, that's it?
So
Anyhow, I know you can't answer that properly.
Well, I mean, to some degree, I'd love to be able to. I think the industry is we're at a little over 75%, I think, of the airway bill penetration, and the remaining outliers are few and far between.
Sorry, 75%, Brendan?
75% penetration on e-airway bill on available trade lanes. Where we can do e-airway bill, it's being done at 75%.
Yeah, right, but there's lots of caveats, this small print and things to be signed there. I'm talking about now the majority of the paper handover from a check-in point to a dock, from the export reception, back of house, back again, cross all over. It's not necessary, Brendan. The manifests, the copies, all of the paperwork. It's the whole thing, Brendan.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
And I think one of the things that for me is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges ahead of me and ahead of us as an industry is attempting to actually maybe not go down the path of reading each individual piece of paper, because I think that's been a challenge over the years, right? We try and digitize one piece of paper, find out it has 10 uses, not one, and then it's lows, you know, or actually it's used in method A in Canada and used in method B in Germany, and therefore digitizing it in the same fashion never works. The One Record program actually begins to solve this, right? Where you don't have to, you're not digitizing a piece of paper, right? You're digitizing the entire process, the entire function.
Yeah.
And so I think what and now we've spent the last sort of year and a bit developing the standards. The standards for One Record are done. They're ready. They're available for the industry to implement. We have pilot tests in a number of countries. I don't have the number of participants, but it's significant, where they're actually implementing One Record. There are commercial parties out there in the industry offering it as a service, as a, you know, like an Amazon Web Service. You just go ahead and plug in. And that to me is where the industry needs to focus their attention. So we need to get away from kind of just, and we'll still do messaging. That's still how things will exchange in some cases, but it's really about digitizing the entire process so that we don't have to get this kind of, I don't use that piece of paper that way, I use it this way, and I need a stamp, and therefore I can never use it digital. You know, it's this kind of argument will get us to never fully implement and never fully digitize. And we need to kind of get ourselves as an industry ahead of that.
So isn't that the next step for next year's issue of ICHM? It's
one of them. I think the ICHM, you know what I mean?
To align the whole storyline with the digitization of the documentation, so that there's a global approach and a global alignment.
It absolutely is, and I think bringing One Record into the operational reality is really the next step, right? So One Record, we created the standards. It sits in kind of a digital space right now. It's being pilot tested. It's being implemented by a few parties, bringing it more operationally relevant for the people on the front line, so they have a better understanding through a change process of how they're now going to access information that they need in order to perform their job, right? That to me is the key, right? How do I access what I need to do my job now? And how do I ensure that I'll always have access to what I need as I move forwards? Rather than blow up a document and say, I'm going to add 3 more fields because I also use it later in the process. Let's talk about later in the process, you'll have access to more information.
That's it. But I think, you know, I think if you, like, you know, thinking back to when we first started the ICHM, and we've got all the cross references, etc., and we've got margins, and we got all the cross referencing. I think now is the time to do one where it clearly outlines the opportunity to, you know, to digitize and get rid of certain elements of paperwork and give a phased approach to it, so that, you know, people who come on board early, they get extra support or whatever. And at the end of the day, you know, if people are not doing it, they should be charged more, Brendan, you know? Because we mentioned the word sustainability, and holy mother of Moses, if you put together all of the paper that gets shipped every single day, that's unnecessary. I mean, that's a lot of wasted capacity, which we can't afford at the moment.
There's the paper aspect, the environmental aspect of printing paper and then moving it around in the way that we do. There's also the fact that, for me, sustainability, each efficiency project that you implement, right, makes you more sustainable. Sustainable because you're more efficient as a business, but also you're saving time. The waste in the process is part of this equation. And so, okay, we have to phase this because you can't do everything all in one go. It's just not that kind of business, of course. But phasing it by priority will get us there. And if you look at it from a sustainability perspective, it's kind of inevitable. You have to, and sustainability is now the way we think about things, right? Every airline out there, every freight forwarder, every ground handler has massive sustainability projects, and it's a good thing. It's fantastic. It's what we need as an industry. And so if we can make sure that we include in the sustainability vision all of these other things, the efficiencies, right, the reduction in paper as well, then we're going to make inroads. We're absolutely going to start moving down that path and being able to more fully and completely digitalize our processes.
Yeah, no, good. All right, let me take you to another place now. So because cargo's in everybody's mind now, and you know it's really ramping up and booming along, we're also running into a risk of sort of injuring ourselves by keeping on the hoof for too long. So again, I'm coming down to now, as costs are increasing, you know, people are expecting a certain level of customer service, and there's competition, obviously, but there's also competence issues that are coming into question now, and then compliance of that competence. So it questions then the amount of control that's in place. So again, it's a sort of a circle that keeps rotating on itself. Now, IATA operations training, you know, IATA offers the industry most dynamic and innovative training solutions, which yes, it does. And there's so much training out there, Brendan, all over our industry. And unfortunately, certain people are, you know, putting out messages, you know, when the business comes back, you need to be more prepared, etc. So certain people are thinking they've got to get training. Now, one of the things I've been a big advocate of, and I always keep saying it, I did a little exercise several times on what I consider to be the best training courses I've ever been on. So what I did was I wrote a note in my diary in advance, which was normally around 6 months. And the note was, how much of the training can I actually remember? Okay. Then I did another note for 9 months, which is, if you looked through it when you did it, what parts of it did you put aside for use later on that you think would be of really good benefit? And then I did the third note after the year, which is, what did I actually use and what do I still remember? Now, the first one, Brendan, was probably way over 70% absolutely gone. Okay. The second one, what I kept was pretty good, 10, 15%, some things that I thought that'd be nice to remember or nice to remember. When it got to the year, it was way below 5%. Okay. So my question now is, if you take a training regime or a catalogue or the curricula or the trainer's background or whatever, or the ATC or whatever, whichever training company, they're all so brilliantly professional. The documentation is so formal, so it all makes sense as a standalone. But if that's the sort of numbers, why on earth are we doing that amount of training and taking so many people out of the workplace? Because going back to the C steps, CEO, cargo, cash. Why is a CEO going to send people on loads of training if it's costing too much because of the cost of the training, plus it's costing because he has to release all of those people? And you know as well as I do, when things are strapped, most managers, supervisors, etc., they don't send the people who should be on the blooming training. They send the people that are available to go to training. And that's also a pain in the rear end. So when you've got that sort of issue in place, why aren't we now doing something that totally changes that platform? And one of the things that I definitely keep thinking about is, it's far better to learn by doing than it is by viewing. Okay.
Yeah.
And even though now we've got online this and online that, and what we're doing here together, I mean, it's been absolutely brilliant. But is it the way I would like to do things forever? No, not at all. And getting people and signing off and making sure that competence is competence. And the other question I gave with training, Brendan, was I'd sit and listen to the way trainers, where they came from, were they permanent, what their background was, how much real specialist knowledge of the course did they have, apart from being a trainer. There are so many things that I think we should be doing differently. But one of the things most definitely is at the end of those courses, people would say, I'm going to ask a load of general questions, provided I get the right answer from the group, everybody passes. Or the testing is so basic, it's not real competence. Okay. And I think now moving forward, we've got to give people the opportunity to be much, much better than they are now, much, much better than they thought they probably could be. So we need to do a lot of reskilling, upskilling, cross-skilling, new skilling, so their self-reliance and their self-value improves. Because I think, again, in the future, there's going to be equipment pooling, there's going to be personnel pooling, there's going to be premises pooling, all around who's got what and where, etc. Because it's a difficult time to do a lot more investment. So with that in mind, how do you think the training side within our business and our industry should change and possibly will change?
So my view and our view is really that we need to move towards competency-based training and assessment. It's a completer picture of someone's competency to be able to actually do the job that is required of them. We started with dangerous goods. There's actually a competency-based training and assessment framework available. And what we did was we recognized very quickly that this was really the way we need to go in general in aviation, but quite specifically in cargo. And so we started pulling together the various elements so that we can do a competency-based training and assessment approach for everything in cargo. And what this does is it allows you to actually articulate exactly what an individual will need for all of their trainings, a complete spectrum of what they need. So if you have individuals who are unique in your operation, you would then be able to design a very specific training flow and package and the things you need of them, as well as how you assess it, right? Because that's actually the main part, which is, okay, you took some training, you'll forget very quickly unless you start applying it. So we need to get you to start doing what you just learned, and we need to assess that you are capable, competent, ongoing. Right, on an ongoing basis. That's where the industry absolutely needs to go. Competency-based training and assessment. We also did an initiative where we mapped out the entire cargo journey and who's going to interact then along the cargo journey. And if you were interacting at that moment, what courses what might actually exist in that space? What kind of training kind of is already there? A little bit longer term, this allows us to fine tune and tailor that, or it allows other people in the industry to fine tune and tailor that training, right, to exactly what the individual needs, not spending necessarily quite as much time in the training classroom when they don't need 100% of what is on offer of a generic version of the course. They can take the 50 or 60% of that material that is required for them to become competent in their jobs. So we've done a little bit of work in that space. It's shown us that there is quite a bit more work to do as an industry as a whole. We're not really there yet. We're a highly regulated industry that has built up our training packages over many, many, many years. And as a result, we have very solid foundations for why they are there and how they exist. And it will take us some time to pull that apart. But it is also very clearly the way the industry needs to go. We need to move to a place where personnel can get trained on what they need, assessed, and they remain competent on an ongoing basis, regardless of how their job kind of shifts and evolves over time. Throw a few more digital skills at them. Okay, we don't need to bring you back to your intro to cargo necessarily and add how to do that with one record. We really just need to, you are already competent on those elements. We need to make sure you understand how to access the information you need for your job.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. And like I say, I've got some very clear ideas on how things I think should be made to move forward, because in some cases, and especially in some cultures, the elongated training causes such a, it causes such a head-to-head. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and removing people from an operation is challenging at the best of times, right?
Yep.
We've all done that. In fact, I was a training instructor, and it's my job to, do all the recurrent training, maybe on dangerous goods or on anything else inside the operation. And I'd have to go down and bargain and negotiate with our shift managers to be able to take some people who are needed. They need to take the training. They'll fall out of recurrent training shortly, but they're needed in the operation. And that was during relatively, good times.
Yep.
Now that we're in a pandemic situation where you have maybe some workplace issues, maybe not everyone's allowed in the office, maybe you have more space required between individuals, so you can't fill your classroom as you would have, it becomes even more challenging. And so it's really kind of becoming an even more pressing issue that we give our people the skills they need, and that we ensure that they remain that way throughout their career.
Exactly. And like I say, Brendan, the relevancy and also people being updated and people being clear on what's happening. You've only got to look across so many industries now. Everybody's affected. They're affected because of people working from home. They're affected because of furlough. They're affected because of just the way the business is. And then all of a sudden you get a spike and people aren't capable of dealing with it. They haven't got their minds, everything's not working the way it was before. So there's that has to be addressed. But also now, because the costs of our services and our business is going up, okay, customers expect a greater deal of quality and of consistency. And Brendan, that's dropping, and it's dropping at alarming levels. And I was talking earlier this week with someone Stan Wraith, and we were talking about this. And at the end of the day, one of the major messages is that our business now is all about speed, transparency, and quality. And if you can tick the box on all three of those, then the pricing issue comes in. And we've got different models. We've got high value models and we've got volume models. But the one thing for sure is not a single cubic meter should go out empty on any aircraft now because of such limited capacity.
Yeah.
And we really, really need to be focusing on all of that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, focusing on quality programs, ours, CEIV, Smart Facility, these kinds of things, or others, there are other quality programs, is absolutely key for the industry. It's kind of one of these table stakes type things now. You want to do business in the e-commerce space, you're going to need to be fast. You're going to need to be reliable. I'll add that one to your list of things that you need to do. Transparent, right? Because people need to see where their goods are, and of quality, right? So reliable, but of quality. And so we're going to have to continue to focus on these quality programs, these quality initiatives, make it a lived process, make it really the way that we operate on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to a layer we inject, attempting to provide controls around something that isn't really lived. And I think that's a key area of focus. Make sure we don't lose focus on quality while we're managing these kind of the capacity constraints, the real dynamic shifts in the business, in what aircraft and what type of aircraft and how I'm going to load them, and we really need to make sure we don't lose focus on quality.
Yeah, no, 100%, Brendan, and like I say, it's so important now, because that'll be another the straw that breaks the camel's back for people to start looking at different alternatives and different options. If our industry can't keep up with the demand whilst we've got these capacity pressures, it's going to be crucial. Now, you mentioned in there Ceiv, Brendan, and I remember I gave a presentation at a conference and you were in attendance, and it was like the old Ali versus Fraser, GDP versus Ceiv, and which one should you do, etc. Now, I'm not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but looking at the way things are now with costs and everything, I mean, Ceiv is an expensive investment. And now when you look at the vaccines and what they've done and the responsibilities that should be on the producer of the vaccines to ensure that the packaging can take them through that transport chain protected, but is only affected by the excursions. And obviously that reduces then the amount of time. But that overall time period should be sufficient enough to serve our entire process chain, provided we do things factory to factory, get it in, process it, get it out, keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. Now, that surely also now is going to be a challenge for people moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, we need to continue to focus on the vaccine side of things. So before I touch on CEIV, vaccine distribution, a lot of emphasis on it right now. And I think that in the air transport part of it, this is something that many of our airlines, many of the ground handlers, they're very good at. So this is something we just need to keep attention on, keep the focus on it, not kind of lose things, let a temperature excursion occur, not allow that. But it's something we do quite well, right? As an industry, we're a fast industry. We don't spend a lot of time on the ground. As long as we don't have customs delays or other processing delays, we shouldn't then have lots of time on the ground, right? And it'll keep moving. Challenges still result in the distribution so prior to it actually coming to air transport, and then obviously final distribution, getting it into the arms of the individuals who need the vaccines ultimately. So those challenges still remain, and we need to work together to help flatten those kinds of very dynamic changes. Then we kind of look at things like CEIV or GDP. For me, you need to look at what it is that you need to do as a business. So what's best for you. CEIV is an investment in a number of different areas, right? So you're going to invest in your training, you're going to invest in your quality processes, you're going to invest in the way that you manage this on a day-to-day basis with your personnel. And that's right for some people. And then there are others who are going to say, no, that's not quite right for me. My focus is maybe in a different area. I need more emphasis in a different space. And then they might go and combine other certifications. That's a decision for each party to make. I think the benefits of doing a CEIV program, doing a smart facility operational capacity program are quite clear, right? You get an assessment of where your training's at, you get an assessment of where your procedures are at, you understand how you're supposed to oversee things, and therefore you get a really good picture of your operation in that space, in that high value vertical in many cases, right? In pharmaceuticals, well beyond vaccines. This is going to be for everything that you do in the pharmaceutical space. And pharmaceutical growth, perishable growth, it's quite large in our market right now, in our industry. And so I think it still makes a lot of sense for a lot of different parties where that's a business that they wish to be in. They want to focus on a special cargo type product. They need to make the commitment to do so in one way or another, right? And ultimately handle it properly, right? Otherwise, with or without a CEIV, the business goes away and they either find other parties or they simply change up their supply chain model altogether. If you're not handling it properly, then fine, I'll look elsewhere. It's the reality of a very competitive space.
No, true enough. Right, so now another area that's a huge issue and one that I'm seeing deteriorate and seeing people turning a blind eye because of the finances and the commercial side of it. And whilst everybody knows how important it is, there really isn't enough collaborative focus and determined approach to getting it to a level that we all would like to see, and that's e-commerce and undeclared dangerous goods, Brendan. And to regulate and to communicate and to make the customers aware, to make the businesses aware, and to cut out the shortcuts that are so obvious. Whether it needs airport zoned e-commerce areas where everything has to be screened again or whatever, but there needs to be something there, because the undeclared levels, Brendan, they're almost at pandemic level. And everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. So it really, and I don't think anybody associated, especially not with the accountability. So whether it's the CEO again, who is aware of everybody's responsibilities, but at the end of the day, it's going to be his accountability. God forbid if something happens, and that validation and verification loop hasn't been serviced properly. And people now, they really need to be aware this is really, really dangerous now, Brendan.
Yeah, the demand on lithium batteries and lithium battery powered equipment is increasing at a very rapid rate. It's a little over 20% year on year in terms of demand. And we still see far too many issues of abuse, as well as some of the other areas of non-compliance that can occur with the more, maybe they weren't completely aware of the regulations. And those, maybe it's a little bit easier to solve once we can get to them, once we can understand who they are. And in the e-commerce world, that's a challenge. So one of the things that we're going to do is a code of conduct for e-commerce.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it collaboratively. So we're going to develop what goes into it, make sure that it's something people can actually implement.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have a think tank. The goal was to have it face to face. Right now, that's quite a challenge with all the different restrictions, but we're working in that direction. But otherwise, we can do something virtually and build up a code of conduct that this is the way people wish to operate, and this is how we're going to actually implement controls to make sure that this doesn't happen. I mean, for me, lithium battery safety is not just an aviation issue, right? It's a consumer issue as well. You may remember a number of years ago, we had hoverboards. They were the Christmas gift of the year. And a number of them had fires while charging inside homes because of faulty batteries and people who were just, really just trying to get these things out the door to meet the Christmas rush. For me, governments need to just step in straight away and identify that this is a consumer issue as well, right? So there is an obligation then perhaps on the importer to make sure they don't import things which are of poor or lesser quality, and that there is also action taken against the people who actually do this. It is in some cases, willful abuse of what is there, and there the regulators need to step in and really make it clear this is criminal, this is to be penalized, and send a message. And we're not seeing that happen yet. So we need to make sure that occurs. And that's not just an e-commerce issue, but of course with the volume of people buying on e-commerce, right? And just how many people are making purchases and how many different e-commerce companies there are out there, it sort of expanded the problem to some degree.
It's expanded it, stretched it, and all sorts. But there's only so far it can stretch before that band is going to break. Now, Brendan, obviously, I could talk to you for ages, seriously, genuinely, and I don't want to tie up all your time. And again, at the beginning of it, it's just again to re-emphasize, it's a little bit like if you support a football club or a rugby club and they make a signing, okay, and you think, yes, great, now next season is going to be better. Genuinely, mate, that's exactly how I feel with your selection. Okay, so I'm not sure. Would you class yourself as a Messi or a Ronaldo?
Am I allowed to just say that as a Canadian, I don't watch as much football as others and not have to make a decision about
no, because
which supporter?
No, we can talk about American football as well. Would you be a Brady or would you be, an up and coming first drafter?
So style-wise, I was a linebacker, by the way, in high school, so not a Brady. But I mean, for me, all jokes aside, I do appreciate what you're saying. I really want to make sure that we, the industry, kind of collectively do these things together. That's going to be my style, which is something a number of different sportsmen do, sportswomen around the world. They bring people together. They're a leader. They're, this kind of thing. I really want to make sure that we tackle problems together. And that to me is how we get there. So firm up some partnerships, collaborate. We did this really, really well with the ICHC for a number of years when, we achieved quite a lot. We continue to, and that's the kind of approach that I would like to repeat, on all of these different topics that we have.
Yeah, no, good man. And for anybody who's looking, one of the things that I always used to pull your leg about was your fashion sense. And I could never understand why your trousers were so short. but you told me it was because you love to wear socks. So I've actually got a pair of socks here. It's my birthday. So I'm going to put these on for you, mate. Okay, they're quite leery as far as I'm concerned, but I always remember that. I remember the Henry VIII beard, and it's nice to see that with your new function as being a male model in the modern days man's world of fashion. And anybody who can get that magazine, you'll see that Brendan is sporting page 76, 78, and 79, and this colour is the new one for the season. It's a little bit of a clash with the IATA blue, but fair play to you, mate. Listen, I think you're going to do a great job. And the one thing I know for sure, there's going to be so many people in the industry who will be more than happy to work with you and give you support.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that.
All right. I look forward to talking again very, very soon, my friend, and wish you all the very, very best.
Yes, and hopefully next time soon and in person.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to ask you one thing now. Do you think the World Cargo Symposium will go ahead?
At the moment, I believe so. Yeah, a number of the restrictions are starting to come down a little bit, and from an overall kind of where in the world we can go to and come back from, it's looking more positive. We're talking about October, right? So it's not tomorrow. And so it does look like it's moving in the right direction. We certainly have a lot of interest in terms of people who want to come to the World Cargo Symposium, people who want to speak. So I remain optimistic, but we keep monitoring that situation. We're on it day in and day out, because for me, great that people can get there and it's convenient and efficient. We also need to make sure that it's safe for people to be there, right? So that we can put in the right measures that people are comfortable with and happy to be there. And all of that is something that we're going to keep watching as the situation evolves. That really, really close. We have extremely regular discussions and meetings to make sure that we're paying attention to the situation globally.
No, it's just that for some countries it's already on the red list. So the quarantine issue is a big one.
So in quarantine as well as out quarantine, if it takes a significant amount of time to get home or to go back to work when you get home, that's obviously a challenge. And those quarantines are usually in place to manage a risk of some kind. That's the way a country is chosen, although we would advocate for other ways of managing their risk. But in doing so, we have to also make sure that we're addressing that same risk at the event itself, right? That the event is something that's safe, that people are safe at, and their health is sort of our first priority there.
Of course, my friend. Competency and diplomacy as always as well. Good man.
Thanks, Chris.
Absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for giving up your time, Brendan. And as I said before, congratulations. Wishing you all the best of success.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Take care. Cheers.
You too.